I'm working on a factory game called Galactory, which revolves around traveling to different dimensions and planets to obtain items that would otherwise be inaccessible. That's why this March I worked on making the main second dimension for my game, the underworld. My vision for the underworld in the game is that there is a procedurally generated dungeon which randomizes every single in-game day, which holds three main types of rooms: enemy rooms, resource rooms, and rooms which have a bit of both. Although, to add a bit of spice, the dungeon itself isn't the whole entire point of the underworld. Lying at the core of the underworld, or well, the place you enter in from, is a huge room called the Underworld Hub, which you develop and expand as you progress through the game. The Underworld Hub is responsible for storing huge machines which process underworld goods, like turning impure rocks into fine powders. The underworld is going to have somewhere from 3 to 5 floors, each floor containing a different main resource that you can obtain from it, some different enemies, and each floor would be accessible from the Underworld Hub. Now that you sort of know what I'm trying to make, let's see what I've done so far. The very first thing I did was make a procedural dungeon generation system. To start, I turned the whole world into a huge grid of squares, with the size of each tile of that grid being the room size. This way, every time a room spawns in, that tile can assign itself to the room that's occupying it, so I can easily access the room based on the tile. I then create one room directly in the middle of the world, which will act as the underworld hub, since every dungeon must generate the hub. Each room spawns with every single door, but once it spawns in, it decides to pick off a few to make the dungeon more random. This isn't completely random though, since there is quite a couple of conditions to check for whether a door should be deleted or not. For example, the dungeon randomly picks a direction and makes doors in that direction less likely to be deleted. What the system then does is spawns one room in front of each door that's still alive, seeing if it fits, and if not, it tries to spawn a new one. Once the dungeon reaches the desired amount of rooms, it stops generating and enters a cleanup phase. During the cleanup phase, it just patches up any doors that lead to nowhere, and that's the dungeon fully generated. If it doesn't meet the desired room count, it just regenerates the whole dungeon using a different seed, and keeps doing that until it finds a seed that works. To allow the player to walk around the dungeon, I gave the doors hitboxes, I added a quick check to see which player the room was in, and made it lock the player in rooms once they walk in. To make the dungeon feel more centered around the room you are currently in, I made these room blackout objects which cover up rooms that you're not in so you can't see other rooms. I then polished up the camera a bit, making it not peek past the walls and also easing when moving through doors. Navigation was next, since I decided to make a mini-map which chills in the top right of the screen, and also made it so there's a map menu you can open to have a look around the place. The map is incredibly underdeveloped right now, but as time goes on, I'll make tweaks to it so it displays more information. I then worked on a very basic dev tool, which allowed me to make rooms using Unity's tile maps, baking them to a prefab when I'm finished. This was kind of necessary for making rooms, since if I didn't have this room baking system, I would have to be manually placing a bunch of pixel art objects, which would be an absolute nightmare. The rooms were also looking quite empty, so that's when I began to work on some incredibly basic enemies that spawn in the rooms. I was incredibly lazy when I made the enemies though, so the prototype ones that spawn in the rooms kinda just stand there without doing anything. To top off the very basics for what I needed for the underworld, I added resources which you can mine, which drop little ores you can pick up. Since this is a factory game, we're gonna move back to the factory now. I had a problem with the existence of the underworld, the fact that the factory needed to run while you were gone. Running the factory scene in the background seemed like quite a bad idea to me, since it would be terrible for performance, and also create some crazy hassle with having nothing break with the factory scene chilling in the background. Instead, I leaned into the tick system that ran the game, making a function that steps a certain amount of ticks forward on demand. This means I can just run the amount of ticks that would have run when you were in the factory scene when you come back to the factory, acting as if the factory was running the whole time. Finally, I spent a bit of time dressing up the underworld with a bit of art, since for a while now I've been kind of ignoring art and just developing the game. From now on, I'm gonna start leaning into doing art as I go along though, since I feel like I'm much less likely to burn out that way. Finally, I just want to mention that although the changelog seems small, I've been brainstorming quite a lot. I'm just trying to work out the exact details of how everything is going to hang together to make the game as fun as possible, so that's taken away a bit of time I could have spent working on the game. That pretty much wraps up everything I've done this March. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and if you enjoyed it, it would mean the world to me if you liked and subscribed. Anyway, have a great rest of your day, and I'll hopefully see you again in a month's time.